Masechet Baba Kama Daf Yod Chet. We're talking about indirect damage. We saw the example of an ox walking, and it sends some rocks flying, pebbles flying, and the pebbles break something else. In that case, he only pays half nezek. That's indirect. On the other hand, the wagon, even though it's not the animal's foot directly that smashed something, but rather the wagon, in that case, Rava said one would be liable because it is connected. And therefore, anything connected that a zav would make tameh also would be responsible for damage. So it makes a difference if it's directly connected or if it's flying through the air. Flying through the air is more indirect and therefore only half nezek. So now we're going to see some other examples of indirect causation. Tenor Rabbanan. תרנגולים שהיו מחטטים בחבל דלי ונפסק החבל ונשבר הדלי משלמים נזק שלם. We have a bucket that's tied to a rope that's hanging, and now some chickens come and they're pecking at the rope to the point that they sever the rope, and then the bucket falls down and smashes. The owner of the chickens is responsible for paying full damage. So the idea here is that even though they did not peck at and smash the bucket directly, they didn't touch the bucket, but they touched the rope that is attached to the bucket. So this is quite similar to the wagon case, and therefore, even though there is some level of indirectness, but it's all connected, and so therefore you have to pay the full amount, and it's not quite like the pebbles flying through the air, which is not connected, and would be chatzi nezek. Okay, now this baraita is going to come into play to try to answer the following question. Ba'ay Rava, darsa al keli velo shebartu, v'nitgalgel lemakom acher v'nishbar, mahu batar meikara azlena v'gufehu, or dilma batar tebar mana azlena v'usrorot ninhu. If an animal goes and steps on some vessel, but doesn't break it, instead, when it steps on it, it causes the vessel to be pushed and roll away. And it's rolling and rolling, and then it smashes into something and breaks. What do we say about that case? Here's the two options. Do you follow the initial time period, and there the animal caused it to go into motion such that it's inevitable? You can just calculate the momentum and durability of the item, and you can see it will break. And so if you just take a snapshot of that initial moment when it sends it rolling, you can see that it's definitely going to break, and therefore the owner would be fully liable. Or do we say we look at the time of breakage? At the time of breakage, it was not being touched by the animal, and therefore it's the same as pebbles, right? Just like pebbles, even though the animal touched the pebble and kicked it, and then it went flying, but then when it breaks the vessel that's all the way on the other side, the animal is not touching it, so that's called indirect, and therefore should be the same as pebbles and not fully liable. So the difference between pebbles and this is that in the case of pebbles, the animal touched the pebbles, and then the pebbles went and touched the vessel. The animal never touched the vessel, and therefore that is very indirect. Whereas in this case, even though it didn't happen at the same time, the breakage didn't happen at the same time that the animal touched it. In this case, the animal did touch the vessel and pushed it and then caused it to go flying or rolling and eventually break. So that is the question. Is this, do we look at the initial time period and therefore liable, or do we look at the time period when it broke and therefore would not be fully liable? All right, that's a good question of Rava. Let's see if we can answer it. Tifshot le mid Rabba. Damar Rabba. Let's look at Rava's teacher. Rava's fourth generation. Rabba is third generation. He said the following statement: Zarak keli merosh hagag, uba acher ushbaro b'makel patur. Tamrinan le mana tebira tebar. Look, Rabba said this very interesting case of someone who throws someone else's vessel off of a roof, and now it's on its way falling down. It's definitely going to smash and break when it hits the floor. So if that's the case, the guy on the roof would certainly be liable to pay for it. Here is the thing: before it reaches the ground, another person comes with a stick and smashes it mid-air and breaks it. So now the question is, who is liable? The one that threw it from the roof because it was definitely going to break, but it didn't break yet, and the guy with the stick made it break sooner. So the guy with the stick actually broke it. So who is liable? And he says the guy who broke it with the stick is not liable, because we say he broke a broken vessel, even though it was whole, but it was in the air, and it was inevitable that it was going to break, and therefore is broken already. What you see here is that the guy who threw it from the roof, he is liable, because we look at the initial time period of when he drops it, and at that time period we can do the physics, calculate, yes, it's going to go at this speed, it's definitely going to break, and that's it. He becomes liable. And it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what happens after. We don't look at the time period of when it actually broke. If you focus on the time period it actually broke, the guy with the stick did it. But no, not true. We look at the initial time period, and at that initial time period, that was the guy on the roof, and that would be the same thing here. We look at the initial time period when the ox was in contact with the item, and therefore the owner would be fully liable. So this is actually quite a good proof. However, it's not good enough, because we say l'Rabba peshita le, l'Rabba mibayah le. Okay, Rabba, he knew this halacha and he was convinced of it. Fine, but Rabba, he still has a question, even though Rabba is a student of Rabba. But he's looking for a higher level of authority. He wants a baraita to prove the case, and so we're going to continue to search for an even more authoritative answer. Tashema. Hidus eno mu'ad, v'yesh omerim harei ze mu'ad. Well, maybe we can find a Tanaitic answer and say it's actually a machloket Tanaim by looking at these two baraitot that are contradictory. Hopping of chickens. One baraita says it's not considered mu'ad. It's an unusual way for chickens to hop. And the second way says if it hops and breaks things while it's hopping, then it's considered mu'ad and he has to pay a full amount because it is a normal way. Okay, now we have to interpret this before we get to the application here. Hidus salkadatech. Wait a second. You're talking about hopping? Chickens hop. This is a normal way for chickens to move. So can't be talking about simply hopping. Ela lav hidus vihitiz ubeha kami palge demor sabar batame kara azlinan mor sabar batar tebar mena azlinan. Must be that it's talking about hopping and pushing. That it hops and then lands on something and pushes it, and causes it to eventually, pushes it, and then the item rolls and smashes into something and breaks. In other words, exactly our case. And what do you see here? That there was one of the baraitot says that we follow the initial hopping, and when the chicken pushed the item, and therefore at that point it was in contact with it, and that's considered direct, and therefore the second baraita here that says mu'ad. And the first one that says eno mu'ad says that we look at the time of breakage. At the time of breakage, it was all the way rolled down the hill and smashed into something else. The chicken was far away, was not touching it at all, and therefore this is called indirect, the same as pebbles, and would be liable only half, not a full amount. So it seems that this is a machloket Tanaim. Was that true? We say no, not necessarily. Lo. When it says that it sent things flying, it doesn't mean that he sent the vessel flying. Could be that it's hopping and sent pebbles flying, and then the pebble went and smashed something that was further away. And in that case, if it's a case of pebbles, then we can explain the contradiction between the two baraitot as being a parallel to the machloket between Sumchus and Rabbanan, where Sumchus says when pebbles fly, you have to pay a full amount, and Rabbanan says when you break something indirectly with pebbles, then you do not pay a full amount. So Sumchus would be the one that says mu'ad, and Rabbanan would be the opinion that says not mu'ad, but really is talking about pebbles, which is much more indirect, and this baraita is not necessarily talking about our case where the animal is touching it and pushes it at the initial point. All right, so no answer from there. Now we're going to bring the original baraita that we started the daf on. Tashema. Tanigulin shemechatitin bechebel deli. V'nifsak hachebel nishbar hadeli. Meshalemin nezek shalem. Shema mina batar meikara azlinan. If the chicken is pecking at the rope, and then the bucket falls, if the rope breaks and the bucket falls, you have to pay a full amount. And so what do we see here? Even though when the rope breaks, the bucket is still intact. The bucket then falls to the floor, falls down the mountain, and gets smashed on the floor. Only then does it break. And so at the time of breakage, the bird is not touching it, it's far away from it. And so, if so, then one should be not liable, but this Baraita says fully liable. What do we learn from here? That in fact, we look at the initial stage at the time that the bird pecks the rope and breaks the rope. All right, it's touching it. Okay, it's touching the rope that's attached to the vessel. That doesn't matter. It's touching the something that's attached to it. And at that point, we can make the calculation and see it's going to fall and going to break. And therefore, you see, we follow the initial state and not the end state when it breaks. All right, this seems to be good proof that, yes, the owner is fully liable in such a case. But then we say, wait, maybe not. Tirgema achebel. Maybe when it says you have to pay the full amount, it's not the full amount of the bucket, but rather the full value of the rope. That's what he has to pay. Wait a second. This is an unusual act for a chicken to break ropes. And so, since it's an unusual thing, it should be within the category of keren and pay only half. And the answer is, well, maybe the ma'us belisha, maybe the rope has dough on it, and therefore it's a normal thing because the chicken wants to get at the dough to eat it, and that would actually be a normal activity. And so that's why he pays the full amount, because he's paying for the rope with the dough on it. Wait a second, this whole thing doesn't make sense. Right? The case is that when the rope breaks, the vessel breaks, the bucket breaks. So obviously, when it says you have to pay, it's talking about the vessel that broke. If you were talking about just the rope, then you wouldn't need to talk about the fact that the vessel broke. So obviously, you're talking about the vessel broke, and he has to pay for full value of the vessel. So this seems to be a good proof, in fact, that we follow the initial state. But then we say, Ela sumchusi damar serurot nezek shalem mishalem. No, but maybe this whole baraita is actually just the opinion of Sumchus. And Sumchus would say you have to pay a full amount, even when the rock goes flying and it's not touching the vessel, is not touching the chicken at all. And so in this case, all the more so, Sumchus says you have to pay a full amount. But how do you know that this is the opinion of Rabbanan also? Maybe Sumchus is the author of this baraita. And we say that can't be. Sumchus ema sefa. This baraita has a continuation. The continuation is another case of Nitaz mimenu sheber v'nafal al kli acher ushvara al harishon meshalem nezek shalem al acharon meshalem chasi nezek. In this case, the same as before. The chicken is pecking at the rope, breaks the vessel. That vessel falls, and after that, the piece of that vessel that breaks flies off and destroys a second vessel. So this is now twice removed. And in that case, the owner of the chickens has to pay for the first vessel, just like we said before, because presumably we follow the initial state and it's touching the rope that's attached to the vessel, so it falls. He has to pay a full amount for that. But for the second vessel, he only has to pay half, because there it flew out. Right? This is a case of a flying object, like a flying pebble, and so pays only half. Now, Sumchus says that for flying objects, flying pebbles, you pay a full amount. Does he have anything? Does he have a case of half payment? No. Therefore, you see from that the sefa must be Rabbanan, who say you'd pay chasid nezek for the flying thing. And therefore, if we go back to the resha, or even the sefa here, because you pay full amount for the first vessel. Well, why do you pay a full amount for the first vessel? Must be because we follow the initial the initial state, the initial action of the animal, where it is touching the vessel or the rope attached to the vessel. And so we see that we can conclude, yes, we follow the original state. Now, but maybe you'll say, hold on, maybe this entire baraita is the opinion of Sumchus. And although Sumchus says that when you have one flying object break something, you have to pay a full amount, right? Because that's called something generated by its force. but maybe a second order force generation, that I do something that causes one domino, and that domino causes a second domino, and well, they're all flying. Maybe in that case, even sumchus would say 50%, right? For the first, let's say a case of the pebbles, the ox pushes a pebble, flies and breaks one thing, and then a piece of that thing flies and goes something else. Maybe sumchos would say only the first force causation is 100% payment, but the second one is a half payment, and therefore this entire thing could be sumchos, and we wouldn't have a proof according to Rabbanan. But we reject this. Rav Asher, koach kocho, l'sumchus kocho kekocho dameh, or lav kekocho dameh. Rav Asher actually asked this question one time and wondered, according to sumchus, although you definitely have to pay 100% for the first item, that's the single order force, but for a double order force, according to sumchus, is that considered still its force or not its direct force? And then for the second one, you only have to pay 50%. And Rav Asher had no answer to it. Tifshot le de lav kocho dameh. But if this baraita was the opinion of Sumchos, then Rav Asher would have been able to answer his question that, in fact, it's not like it's forced because he pays only for 50%. Since Rav Asher did not bring this, it means that that's not a proper interpretation of it. Therefore, ela lav Rabbanan hi shemamina batame karaz leinan. In fact, this entire baraita is the opinion of Rabbanan, and we see that in a case that's the equivalent to Rava's original question of an ox that steps on something and causes it to go flying, and then it breaks or rolling, and then it breaks upon impact. We follow the initial state, just like in this case of the chicken pecking at the rope and it falls. We look at the initial state. Oh, chicken, it's your fault. Look, see, you're touching it, even though the breakage happens at a secondary point. And so, yes, we can prove that you have to pay the full amount in such a case according to Rabbanan. All right, seems like we have such a great proof, but we end off saying not necessarily. Amar Bevai bar Abaye tekazil mineh mineh. In this baraita with the chicken, the sefa, it says the sefa here says that if nitaz mimenu shever, it could be that the first vessel, that the chicken is not the case of pecking, but rather that he's pushing it the whole time, right? The chicken is just keeps hopping on it and pushing it the whole time, and therefore when it breaks, it's actually he is touching it, and therefore that's why he has to pay a full amount for that first vessel. And so it's not necessarily that it breaks at a later point, although we thought it was, we thought that in the Resha also that it drops and falls later, and not necessarily. It could be that he is continually following it, right, and is hopping on top of the vessel, and in that case, it breaks, even though it's rolling, but at the time it breaks, the chicken is touching it, and therefore there's no proof from this baraita whatsoever. Rava now presents yet another dilemma. Ba'e Rava, hasi nezek serorot, migufo mishalem or me'aliyah mishalem. Right, we just saw that machlok between Rabbanan and Sumchos regarding flying pebbles, indirect. And according to Simchos, you have to pay the full amount, but according to Rabbanan, you pay half amount. Now, when you say half amount, how will you calculate it? Is it from the body of the wild animal that causes the damage? In other words, you don't pay more than its value, similar to Hatzi Nezek for a short tam in the Shut Rabim. Or do you pay from the perpetrator, or the ox owner's highest amount, highest level quality land, like you would pay if it was a nezek, if it was all other cases of damages, most cases of damages that you pay a full amount, including a shor moad and the shut rabim. So here's the two sides. Migufo mishalem delashkechan hasi nezik mishalem me'alya. On the one hand, it should maybe it's limited to the value of the perpetrating animal, because we never find a case, an example of hatzi nezek that the owner has to pay out of pocket from his best land. Right. The other example we have of hatzi nezek is shor tam in the shut rabim. Where he only pays for the value of the animal, and therefore maybe the flying pebbles, is the same as this, because that's the one model we have for chassid nezek, so it'll be limited to the body. Or maybe in the case of pebbles, even though he's paying only half, he still has to pay from his superior land, and therefore there's no limit to the amount that we would have to pay, up to, he has to pay the full half amount of damages, because we never find an example of an animal that is doing something in the normal way, that there's a limit that it pays only from the body of the animal. Because when we see a limit, that's only regarding kedin. That if it's tam, then the kedin pays only from the body of the animal. But that's specific to kedin, which is an unusual form of damage. But in any normal form of damage, you have to pay the full amount from the best. Okay, so this is a really good question. This chassid nezek of sedorot, on the one hand, looks like chassid nezek, so it should be limited. On the other hand, it's a part of shen and regel. And so therefore, it's a normal way of causing damage, and therefore should be a full amount. All right, so let's try to answer it. We're going to try to answer it first with the same contradictory baraitot that we saw just now. Tashemahidos eno mo'ad, yeshomrim ze mo'ad. So if a chicken is hopping, on the one hand, one baraita says it's not mo'ad. On the other hand, another one says it is mo'ad. Well, we have to explain this. Hidos akadatech, really hopping? Hopping is a normal way of chickens to move. So therefore, it should definitely be mo'ad if it causes damage while hopping. Rather, must be talking about that it hopped and caused pebbles to fly out. And so this is really about pebbles. And so what is the machloket between these two? And so maybe both of them are talking about when pebbles fly out, and we're assuming like a banan that you pay 50%, not like sumchos, at least for now. And when it flies out, when the one opinion that says eno mu'ad, that means it's going to pay the half, like a short tam, meaning up to the amount of the body of the animal. And the other opinion says mu'ad, and that would mean you pay half, but it's but that half you pay like a short mu'ad that pays the entire amount from the best value, the best of the owner of the animal. And so that's what it means. So that's actually Rava's, two sides of Rava's question is actually a machloket between these two baraitot. Is that right? And we said, no, not necessarily. Easier to explain that the baraitot are parallel to the machloket between sumchos and Rabbanan. One of the baraitot is the opinion of sumchos, who says that pebbles flying out, even though it's indirect, still have to pay the full amount. And that's the one that says mu'ad. And the other one that says eno mu'ad is the opinion of Rabbanan that says since it's indirect, you pay only half. And therefore, those contradictory baraitot are not going to help answer our question. So we'll try again. Tashema. This is a Mishnah coming up later on Daf Kaf Aleph. Hakeleb shenatal charara vehalach lagadish. You have a dog that took a pita bread off of burning coals. And so now it's carrying the pita bread in its mouth, and it goes, and there's a coal stuck onto the bottom of the pita bread as it's carrying it. And then he goes over and he throws the coal off, and the coal flies and ignites a stack of grain and causes it to burn, causes damage. And he also eats the loaf. He eats the loaf and causes the grain to burn. So what's the damage? Al charara meshalem nezek shalem, al gadish meshalem hasi nezek. For the loaf, he has to pay a full amount, because that's just a regular case of shen. He goes into someone else's field, and he takes some food there, so that would be full nezek as regular shen. But for burning down the field, he pays only half nezek. Now we're going to try to figure out why does he pay only half nezek, right? Just to set up theoretically, there's two possible reasons. One is that this is an unusual thing to do, and so this would fall into kedin. The pays half nezek. According to Rabbanan against the bitarfon, in the Reshut HaNizak. The other possibility is that it's indirect. He's throwing this thing like pebbles, and that's why he pays half nezek, and that would also be Rabbanan against Sumchus. Okay, so let's see. My Tama, La Mishum Dahaviyalahu Serorot, is this not a subset of pebbles, a case of pebbles, because he's throwing this, and he only indirectly burns down the grain with the coal. There is a braita about the Mishnah that we didn't see yet, but there is a braita that says he has to pay half from its own body, from the body of the animal, and therefore we can answer Rava's question. Here's a case of paying chasi nezik for pebbles, where there's a braita that says explicitly it's limited to the body of the animal. So there you go. Isn't that a good proof? And we say, V'tiz bara? No. Can you really understand this braita in such a way, and this Mishnah in that way? In the Mishnah over there, Mishnah continues. We only quoted part of it. But the Mishnah continues and says that according to Rabbi Elazar, he has to pay the full amount, not only for the pita, but also for the grain that burns down. And now, according to Rabbi Elazar, are you going to tell me that he has to pay a full amount up to the body of the perpetrating animal? Do we ever find that full nezek shalem is limited to the body of the animal? That doesn't make sense. So therefore, that can't be the reason. This is not talking about damage because of pebbles. That's not why he's paying nezek, chasi nezek for the grain. Rather, it must be because he's acting in an unusual way with this coal, right? The way that he got the coal and brought it there, this was an unusual act. And that's why it's a subset of keren. Rabbi Elazar sabala k'Rabbi Tarfon. Now Rabbi Elazar, he's going to follow Rabbi Tarfon. Damar mishuna keren b'chasar nizak nezek shalem shalem. As we saw many times before, Rabbi Tarfon thinks that the atypical act, which is keren, it's not the usual manner of behavior of an animal. And if it's in Hatsi Nezek, everyone agrees if it's in Shut Rabim, then you pay only half. Goring in the Shut Rabim is half. But according to the Bitarfon, goring in the Shut Nizak, you have to pay a full amount. And so this is talking about actually a regular case of something that's unusual. And that would be why, according to Rabbanan, this is a subset of keren, and keren, chatzi nezek for keren, certainly would be limited to the body of the perpetrating animal. And so there's no proof for Rava, because Rava wants to know about pebbles. And so then we say, no, velohi maitama mukmat la kerbi tarfon, mishum nezek shalem. Now, why'd you go and say that this is talking about a case of unusual activity, and it's a subset of keren, and therefore Rabbanan and therefore Rabbi Eliezer, who says the full amount must be Rabbi Tarfon, and right. So why'd you go there? Because you have to explain why Rabbi Elazar says nezek shalem must be follows Rabbi Tarfon, and the whole case is of shen, not of pebbles. That's why you rejected this whole thing. No, you don't have to do that. I'm going to go back to what I said before, that this is actually indirect flying coal, and it is in fact a case that's the same as pebbles. Rabbi Elazar sabar kesumchus. Rabbi Elazar says you have to pay the entire amount. He is following sumchus. The amar sorot nezek shalem that says flying pebbles, you have to pay a full amount. And yes, with that which we asked before, wait, could you ever have a full a nezek shalem that would be limited to the amount of the body? Well, actually, yes, at least half of it. V'sabala k'Rabbi Yehuda damar sad tamut b'mkoma omedet v'chi katani migufo asad tamut. Tamut here doesn't mean to die; it means its tam status, its tameness. Okay, so Rabbi Yehuda thinks that when you have to pay a full amount, and so half of it would be like for a short tam, and half of it is now if it becomes mu'ad. Right? If you have a short tam, it becomes mu'ad. So there's really you're paying two halves as if it were a tam, and then the other part as if for it being mu'ad. And therefore, when you calculate the half of it that you're paying for a tam, that payment stays in its tame status. At the same status, same amount you would pay if it was just tam, which means that half of it is limited to the amount of the body of the perpetrating animal, and the other half is talking about and the other half that you have to pay for being muad, you will have to pay for the full amount from the best from the best field. So that is Rabbi Yehuda. And when that baraita on the Mishnah says that you pay only from the animal, that the value of the animal, that was only talking about the first half of payment, according to the Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says you have to pay the full amount because he's following Sumchus, right? But he's saying that even according to Sumchus, who says you have to pay a full amount, that full amount is made up of two halves. And the first half, which would be which would be for its tameness, would be limited to its body, and that's what that baraita is talking about. Even though the second half, which would be equivalent to a mu'ad payment, would have to be fully funded from the best of the grain. And therefore, in fact, we can say that this case is talking about indirect flying pebbles. And according to Rabbanan, who say you pay only half, the Braita says the half is from the body of the animal. So yes, this is a good conclusion, a good proof that you pay half only from the body of the animal. Amar le Rav Sama bered Rav Asher Rabina emur deshmat le Rabbi Yehuda betam v'nasa mu'ad b'mu'ad metechilato mi shamat le. However, we thought we had a good proof, but in fact we do not, because Rav Sama, the son of Asher, tells Ravina this statement of Rabbi Yehuda, when he said you split the payment between the tam part and the mu'ad part, that's only talking about a case of keren, where it was tam and then it became mu'ad, where it makes sense to separate the two parts of the payment. When it was tam, that first half would only be paid from the body. Now it becomes a mu'ad, and now that added 50% is going to be from the best field. That's when it makes sense to split it into two and treat them differently. But Rabbi Yehuda would not say it, and it really doesn't make sense to apply it to Sumchus's example, because Sumchus says, you're talking about Shen. For Shen, an animal is always mu'ad for Shen or Regel, and therefore, there's no tam, there's no half status as a tam. It never was tam then to become mu'ad. It's mu'ad right from the beginning for Shen and Regel. And therefore, it would not make sense to say that only half of it, that the first half is from its body, according to Sumchus, and therefore we cannot explain the Mishnah and Baraita in that way. And so, sorry, we don't have a proof from there. Instead, let's try to prove the Rava's original question from a different interpretation of this baraita. Ela ki kamar Rabbi Elazar nezik shalem kegon de ya'ad ubehakami palge mor sabar yesh ha'ada'a lisrodot umor sabar en ha'ada'a lisrodot. This baraita about the dog that goes and is carrying coal and throws it is in fact a case of pebbles. And therefore we understand why, according to Rabbanan, it would be half nezek. And according to the Rabbi Elazar, he doesn't say full nezek because he agrees with Sumchus. No, forget that. But rather because this dog has already damaged with pebbles many times before, and already 3 times, and now it becomes mu'ad for sending pebbles flying and breaking things. And therefore, it has to pay a full amount. And the machloket between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Elazar is that Rabbi Elazar thinks that there is such a thing as mu'ad for indirect damages by flying pebbles, and that's why he has to pay a full amount. And the Rabbanan say no, there's no hada'ad and no such thing as being mu'ad for indirect damage. Rather, it's a short time the whole time. And then the Braita says about this that one pays from the body of the animal. And this is a good satisfactory explanation of the Braita. And it says you pay for the body of the animal. And there you go. Chatzi nezek for pebbles is paid by the body of the animal. And we have a good answer, a solid proof. But here there's another problem. Yesh ha'ada'a lisrodot o en ha'ada'a lisrodot. Either Rabbanan en ha'ada'a lisrodot, either Rabbi Elazar yesh ha'ada'a lisrodot. Rava had another dilemma. He has a lot of dilemmas. And one of them was this very question of, can an animal become mu'ad for sending pebbles flying or not? And he had that question. Now, if we interpret this baraita as we just did, then he would have a simple answer. According to Rabbanan, no, no matter how many times it does it, it's not mu'ad. According to Ariel Eliyahu, yes, if it does it a few times, then it becomes mu'ad, and he would have had a simple answer. So why didn't Rava simply answer that question based on this braita? Amar lach Rava, ki mevaya li lididi alibad Rabbanan de palig ale de sumchos. Aval hacha ben Rabbanan ben Rabbi Elazar kesumchos sibira lehu damar serorot nezek shalem meshalem. Rava could say to you that the reason why he didn't have a simple explanation is because my original question about whether for serorot you pay from the body of the animal chasi nezek or not, I wanted to ask that question according to Rabbanan, who disagree with Sumchos and say that pebbles you pay 50%, and that's what I was asking. I want to know according to Rabbanan whether that 50% payment is from the body of the animal or the full amount from the best property. But this baraita is entirely according to Sumchos. Both Rabbanan that say you pay half payment for the grain, and Rabbi Elazar that say that you pay full payment for the grain, they're all following Sumchos who says that for pebbles you pay a full amount. In other words, in this interpretation, we're saying that this kol is both indirect and therefore a subset of pebbles, and also is unusual. Because it's an Rabbanan say chasi nezik because it's an unusual type of damage, and it only did it one or two times. It was not mu'ad. Rabbanan in this baraita say you pay only half because they're following Rabbanan that keren, an unusual activity in Reshut HaNizak, is only half. And Rabbi Elazar, who says you pay a full amount, that's because he's following Rabbi Tarfon that says keren in Reshut HaNizak, whether it's tam or mu'ad, doesn't matter, you pay a full amount. And so that's what the machloket is about. And therefore this half amount, that would be from the body of the animal because it's a keren, it's an unusual. And therefore you can't bring any proof from here that that in a case of pebbles, when you pay chasi nezek, it would be from the body of the animal. No, the payment here is, it happens to be pebbles also, but it's also a subsidiary of keren, and so yes, it would be limited to the body of the animal for that reason. Okay, then we ask, we know that according to the Bitarfon, you have to pay a full amount, but would he say that it's limited to the body? Because we said that according to the Rabbi Elazar, back in the Baraita, it's limited to the body also, according to both Rabbi Elazar and Rabbanan. Now, Rabbi Tarfon wouldn't say that when you pay the full amount, it's limited to the body of the perpetrating animal, right? Would Rabbi Tarfon ever say that? And the answer is, in fact, yes, he does. Where does Rabbi Tarfon learn his halacha that you have to pay a full amount for keren in the Reshut HaNizak? He learns it from a kal vachomer from keren Reshut HaRabim. We're going to see the kal vachomer in the Mishnah on Daf Kaf Daled. However, it goes along the following lines, that if shen and regel, that you don't pay anything in the Reshut HaRabim, but you pay a full amount in the Reshut HaNizak, then keren, which you pay half in Reshut HaRabim, all the more so you should pay the whole thing in Reshut HaNizak. And therefore, just like keren is limited to the body of the animal in Reshut HaRabim, it should be limited to the body of the animal in Reshut HaNizak. Because dayola ba min hadin lihot kanidon. Whenever we have a kal vachomer, you can't learn something that's more stringent from something that's less stringent. And so since keren in the Reshut HaRabim is limited to the body of the animal when you pay chasi nezek, so the thing that you're learning too, that you have to pay for the full amount in the Reshut HaNizak, still would have to be limited to the body of the animal. And so yes, according to Bitarfon, even the full nezik is from the body of the animal. How did Bitarfon let the dayo hold on? Bitarfon happens to not accept that limitation in general regarding kal vachomers. He thinks that no, a kal vachomer, even though you're learning from something that was more lenient or limited to the body, but then once you're making a kal vachomer and you're learning that this in the Reshut HaNizak you pay full amount, you can use the kal vachomer and go all the way and go even beyond the thing that you were learning from according to the Bitarfon. Therefore, Rabbi Tarfon can learn that once you're paying a full amount, you pay it from the best of the land without any limitation. But then we say, no, that's not true. When we say that Rabbi Tarfon has no limitations on a kavachomer, and you can learn even beyond the original thing you were learning from, that's only when the kavachomer would not exist if you put that limitation on it. But in the case where a kavachomer would still be logical, and you could still use the kavachomer even with the limitation, then he does put that limitation on it. And in this case, the kavachomer works perfectly fine even with the limitation. You're still learning plenty that the derivation comes from keren in the reshut harabim, and there is a limitation that you only pay up to the value of the body of the animal. And now we're learning from there, based on shen and regel, that you have to pay a full amount for keren in the reshut hanizak. But that limitation, that the kavachomer will be limited only to the amount of the body. And since Rabbi Tarfon thinks that, then it makes sense for Rabbi Elazar also to think that, and therefore Rabbi Elazar and Rabbanan in our Baraita are actually arguing the same machloket as Rabbanan and Rabbi Tarfon regarding being in Reshut HaNizak. But all that is about Reshut HaNizak, not about pebbles, and therefore cannot give us an answer regarding pebbles, whether that flies, because this Baraita, Rava says, is all about Sumchus, who says you pay a full amount. And so we have no source, no proof from this about what would Rabbanan say when you pay half nezik just for pebbles. Is that limited to the amount of the body of the animal or not? We end up not having any definitive proof. We next return to Rava's question. Gufa ba'e Rava yesh ha'ada'a lisrorot o en ha'ada'a lisrorot lekeren medamin le o dilma tolada de regel hu. So we'll expand on Rava's question that we mentioned incidentally. Rava asked, when it comes to the half payment that one gives, one has to pay for pebbles that fly out, if it does it many times, do we call it mu'ad and then it has to pay a full amount? Or no matter how many times it does it, it's an indirect damage, and so it doesn't make sense to say it's mu'ad to kick pebbles, and so therefore it would always be a half amount. In other words, you can see the two sides as follows. Do we compare it to keren, where there is tam and mu'ad, or is it as simply a tolada of regel, as it's walking? Then it kicks the pebbles, and since regel is mu'ad always and pays a full amount, pebbles are, as a tolada, are half payment, but they're half payment always. It's not because it's tam, it's mu'ad, but a mu'ad payment for indirect damage, like pebbles, is half no matter how many times you do it. That's the question. Let's see if we can answer it. And we bring the same two Baraitot that contradicted each other, and we tried already twice to use them, but they're really not usable, and they're not going to be usable again. But we'll try. Tashema hidus eno mu'ad v'yeshomrim hare ze mu'ad, a chicken hopping. One Baraita says it's not mu'ad, other person says it is mu'ad. Now we ask, hidus al kadatech? Wait a second, could we just be talking about hopping? Hopping is a normal thing for chickens to do. So it doesn't make sense to say eno mu'ad. Ela hidus v'itiz, rather is talking about a case where it hopped and caused pebbles to fly out. My love, so maybe it's talking about a case where the chicken did this 3 times and was warned. And one opinion says that now that it's warned 3 times, it's called mu'ad, and the owner of the chickens has to pay a full amount, even though it's pebbles, but it did it many times, that's mu'ad, so has to pay full amount. And the one that says eno mu'ad says, even if it did it 100 times, it's still considered not mu'atam and pays only half for the pebbles. And so you see, this is the answer to Rava's question. It's a matter of machloket tanaim. And we say, no, la bechadzim na pluktad simchos Rabbanan kami palge. A much simpler explanation of the two Baraitot is, as we said before, that it's talking about it did it only 1 time. And the one that says eno mu'ad, that would be the opinion of Rabbanan, who says you pay half. And one that says mu'ad, that's the opinion of Simchus, that says even for 1 time, you pay a full amount. So no proof from there. Let's try again. Tashema. Bema shehitila gelalim da'isa. An animal defecates onto dough. Rav Yehuda and ruins it. Rav Yehuda omer meshalem nezek shalem. Rabbi Elazar omer hasi nezek. So these two Amoraim argue about that. Rav Yehuda says you have to pay a full amount. Rabbi Elazar says no, only half the amount. Now why? My love kegon de'abad tilata zimneh ubaha kami palged mor sabar yesh ha'ada'a mor sabar en ha'ada'a. We're assuming that this is a subset of regel. And this defecation is kind of like throwing something. It's not that it touches it directly, but rather defecates and then it falls onto the dough without touching it. And so this is the same as pebbles. And so what's the machloket? For example, it did it already 3 times. And the one opinion says that now, Rav Yehuda thinks that since it did it many times, now it's mu'ad, and you have to pay a full amount even for pebbles. And Rabbi Elazar says, no, even if it did it many times, no such thing as mu'ad for pebbles, and you pay only half the amount. And there you go. It's a machloket of these early Amoraim. That would be the answer to Rava's question. And we say, no, that's not a good way to interpret that baraita. This machloket amoraim. La bechazimna o beplugta de sumchos ve'rabanan kami palge. No, and in fact, Rav Yehuda and Rabbi Elazar are arguing along the lines of sumchos and Rabbanan. Rav Yehuda says you have to pay a full amount like sumchos. Rabbi Elazar says you only have to pay half because that's Rabbanan. It only did it one time. Hold on. Wait, this is a very unusual thing to do. Animals don't usually defecate on food. I mean, they would rather eat the food and protect it. So this is unusual, and therefore this should fall under goring. And that would explain the chasin nezek here, because this is a tolada of keren. And the answer is no, the dachik le alma, the animal was forced into a narrow cell where he had no other place to go. And there was dough on the floor, and you gotta go, and so he goes onto the dough. But it's actually a usual behavior because he has no choice. And therefore, it is in fact like pebbles. Now, once you limit the case so to a normal situation, it's the animal. It will be an animal's normal behavior. And then, what are you teaching us? So that Rav Yehuda follows sumchus. So just say Rav Yehuda thinks halakha is like sumchus, and Rabbi Elazar he thinks halakha is like Rabbanan. Why bother? Why bother having them talk about a case of this strange occurrence, when they could just say it simply if that's all they mean. And the answer is gilalim istari chale. They want to tell you a chidush, in fact, about gilalim. I might have thought that since the waste comes from the animal itself, that maybe it's like its own body. It's as if the animal itself went and did it and touched it directly, because it's something that is coming from the animal that touched it. So therefore, I might have thought that this is a direct action, and therefore kamash malan, that since it's not touching it itself with its own body, and only its waste that's falling and onto it is in fact the same as pebbles. And then that's the extra chidush that I learned here. And we also learned Rav Yehuda follows sumchus and Rabbi Elazar follows Rabbanan. One last attempt. Hashema. The Tana Rami Bar Yechezkel. Tan negol sheoshit rosho leavir kili zechuchit. Betaka bo ushvaro meshalem nezek shalem. If you have a rooster that sticks its head into a airspace of a glass vessel and makes a loud crowing noise in the vessel and breaks it. It didn't touch the vessel. Its head didn't touch it. It just goes in there and breaks it. It's like an opera singer, right, comes and sings a high note and breaks all the vases and glasses in your house. But she didn't touch them, right? Would the owner of this rooster be liable? And the answer is yes, Mishal Nezik Shalem. And then a similar case, V'amar Rav Yosef. So that was the opinion of Rami Bar Yechezkel. But then Rav Yosef, and some say Amri Berav, says Sus Shesanaf. If a horse neighed or a donkey brayed, and they did it so loud that it causes vessels to break, then you only have to pay half nezek. So these are the same cases, and yet you have Rami Bar Yechezkel says full amount, and this is half amount. And this is definitely indirect because they're not touching it. It's just the sound waves. My love kegonda abat. Or is this machloket not? When these animals did this 3 times, already and then does it again, it's mu'ad. And the first opinion, Rabbi Chizkel says it's because they did it 3 times. Now it's mu'ad, and that's why he has to pay the full amount. And these opinions of Yosef and Be'erav think that there's no such thing as mu'ad when it comes to pebbles indirect, and therefore you pay the half amount. And there you go. Here's an answer to Rava's question. There's a machloket between these various sages. Allah bechad zimna. No, in fact, we're talking about it. Only did it 1 time. And they're arguing along lines of Simchus and Rabbanan that Rami Bar Yechezkel thinks that it follows Simchus, you have to pay full amount, and Rav Yosef follows Rabbanan, and that's why he says you pay a half amount. Hold on, v'hamishunehu. Wait, isn't this an unusual activity? Why is a rooster sticking its head into a glass jar? That's weird. And the answer is to eat birzaneh. Maybe there are seeds in the glass jar and it's trying to get the seeds. And while it's in there, it happens to crow, as it usually does. And since it's in that situation, it is in fact a normal behavior for it to put its head in the glass. And that's why, since by crowing, that's an unusual activity, according to Rabbanan, he pays only half. According to Simchus, he pays the full amount, but there's no proof from here about any case that he does it 3 times and becomes a mu'ad. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.